Welcome to DT Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. I'm DT Kane, author of the epic fantasy series The Aggersfar Saga and the Spoken Books Uprising. Each week, I read from one of my novels, discuss my writing process, answer your questions, and have general discussions about fantasy fiction. It's like a book club, except I do all the work for you. Find show notes, info about all my novels, and much more at dtkane.com. Here's the show. Part 3, Chapter 8. It was cold and gloomy the morning they were set to leave for the trials, as it always was in erstwhile. But inside Torchsire Library was a flurry of action, busier than Baz could ever recall seeing it. Most of the fuss was centered around Deliritous, of course. The Duke had given him a new cloak, and Deliritous was admiring it in a stand mirror. Supposedly, it was fire-resistant, though Baz wondered how effective it'd actually be if they ran into a true fire breather. It certainly hadn't stopped Deliritous from lighting up like a torch when the Duke had handed it to him, though if the way the Duke had appraised his son when he'd put it on was any indication, Baz suspected the only reason for the gift was to ensure Deliritous looked good for the opening ceremony. Meanwhile, the library's servants were bustling about, hastening to finish packing all the supplies they'd be bringing on their journey, some of which seemed entirely unnecessary. Was that a grappling hook one of the servants had just tossed in Deliritous' saddlebag? Was there a mountain between here and Tome Baz didn't know about? Baztian? Baztian? Oh, good. I haven't missed you. Baz had posted himself in the most inconspicuous nook he could find in the library's entry hall, just trying to stay out of the servants' way. Usually, they ignored him, and when they had to interact with him, they always shied away, just like the other speakers. But today, a few of them had actually smiled at him in a way that he could only describe as encouraging. It made him nervous. "Oh, it's you, Leanna." She pursed her lips at him. "Don't you think they're going a bit light on the food?" he asked, before she could get out a sarcastic remark. "I mean, I know Tome's actually a bit closer than Fortune, and I suppose that looks like enough food for a 2-week trip there and the way back. Assuming we eat like mice, of course. But the trip to Fortune is over paved roads, and you don't have to worry about Cityless robbing you and worms frying you on the way." He was going to say more until he noticed Leanna smiling. "What? You're nervous." He opened his mouth to object, but then realized that was exactly what a nervous person would do. Instead, he huffed out a bitter laugh. "You're flaming right I'm nervous. I might not like being a Torchsire slave, but at least they feed me at regular intervals, and I have a dry place to sleep each night. There's food that grows in the wild, and plenty of game. You'll manage." Baz shook his head. "I wouldn't know a wild mushroom from poison ivy, and can you picture me hunting?" Leanna laughed. "I can't even picture you sleeping outdoors." "Ugh." "I will hunt." Baz started. He'd forgotten Rox was even there. He had a tendency to do that, stand still as a statue. It seemed impossible that a man as large as him could disappear like he did, but between his drab clothing and ashy skin, he nearly looked a part of the wall. Baz waved a hand in Rox's direction without looking at him. "Your footsteps will scare even the deafest animal away, Rox." Leanna sighed at Baz, then nodded toward Rox. "I expect you'll be taking care of both of them." It was more of a statement than a question, which drew a frown from Rox. "My oath is to Deliritous," Rox said. "Yes," Leanna replied, "but he'll be safer with a speaker available for spells, yes?" Rox lowered his eyebrows, and Baz was about ready to step in between the two of them to stop Rox from hurting Leanna. But then he let out a rumble that sounded surprisingly like a laugh. "That garment suits you," the Harbour said. "The illumined ones are known for their truths amongst my people, and you turn words just like an enigman." Leanna's robe was burgundy, as it was every day, though rather than the typical conservator's sigil, This one had a book dragon stitched down its side in gold thread that resembled the statue in her workshop. She inclined her head to the Harbour. Baz scoffed. Sorry to break it to you, Rox, but book dragons have been extinct since the burning. You know, Baztian, Leanna said, turning a sour glare on him, you don't always have to be so negative. It's going to be a dangerous trip. Having a Harbour looking out for you isn't the worst thing that could happen. Actually, Baz could think of few things he'd like less than owing anything to the man who'd ripped Tax's eyes from their sockets. But instead of saying that out loud, he just laughed. That almost sounded like you're worried about me. She shoved him, and since Baz had already been leaning against the wall, he nearly fell over, only catching himself by grabbing hold of a pedestal supporting what he assumed was an expensive vase. It wobbled, but didn't fall. It's myself I'm worried about, Leanna said with a sniff. I had a month's worth of chores planned for you. The workshop needs a thorough cleaning, and the retirees' bandages need changing. My lamps relighting, quills sharpening. The list goes on, and now you won't be here. Baz rolled his eyes. I might not be crazy about this trip, but I don't regret missing a cleaning day or two. Leanna chuckled, then said, Here. She reached into a satchel slung over her shoulder. I got something for you. She held out a package wrapped in brown paper. You what? Leanna's face reddened. Would you just take it? Baz considered the package for a moment as if it might burn him. He supposed Tax had given him a thing or two when he'd been young, and sure, Deliritous gave him things on occasion, mostly headaches, but this looked suspiciously like a gift, and it was only after it began to look like Leanna was considering shoving him again that he took the package. He turned it over in his hands a few times. Whatever was inside was soft and flexible. Not a sword, then. Good. He never even held one of those. Would you just open it? Baz laughed, and she thought he sounded nervous. He tore back the paper rather unceremoniously to reveal a cloak. He grasped the garment by the shoulders and let its length fall to the ground. It was black, of course. That was the only color speakers could wear. But it was a heavy wool, probably as nice as the material the Duke had just given Deliritous. Like his typical robe, which, incidentally, he'd actually been directed not to wear in favor of a better traveling tunic and trousers, it had the Torchsire sigil stitched over one breast and the rune of the Destroyers over the other. And best of all, it has a hood, he exclaimed. Oh, that's great. My ears are always so flaming freezing, and my scalp. Couldn't they let me have a little hair? And... Baz realized he was rambling and shut his mouth. Leanna was beaming at him, which he found actually made him feel pretty good. Thank you, he said. Sure, Leanna replied, smile broadening. A moment later, however, it lessened. Be careful out there, Baztian. Hellar and Marla have been working with their speakers basically from birth. Hellar is obsessed with winning. I don't think he'd go so far as murder, but Marla? Leanna shrugged. We'll be just fine, Baz said, twisting the cloak about in the air so that it settled onto his shoulders. He pulled up the hood even though they were indoors, just to make sure it worked. Knowing Deliritous, at the first sign of trouble he'll simply surrender, and we'll spend a month camping within sight of the city walls. He wished he felt as confident as those words sounded, but at least they earned him a small smile from Leanna as her eyes fell on the hood he'd pulled up, though the expression didn't reach her voice. I don't know, Baztian. Deliritous is under a lot of pressure, and that does strange things to a man. Sometimes they're good, sometimes... She shrugged again. Come on, Leanna, Baz said. You're talking like Deliritous is actually a person, with feelings. We all know that's not the case. Her mouth tilted downward. You really need to give him more credit. I know your history, but... Baztian, I say, stop lollygagging. We'll be late for the ceremony. Deliritous stood before them looking particularly foolish with a slender rapier strapped at his side. Baz could see it was already getting caught in his new cloak. Ah, Conservator Leanna. Deliritous swept a low bow, which she returned with a curtsy and a "Reader Deliritous? You'll take good care of the books while I'm gone, yes?" "Always," she said, "and the retirees as well." Baz pretended not to notice the flick of her eyes she gave Deliritous in Baz's direction. "Right," Deliritous said, clearing his throat. "Of course. Be sure to see to—" He trailed off, face reddening. Baz felt his face heating too, though for a different reason than Deliritous's. "Well, just make sure they're cared for." "Right. Out to the horses, Baztian. We'll be riding to the ceremony." With that, he strode past them and out to the front of the library, where the horses were already saddled and loaded with supplies. The Duke was there on a horse of his own, once more wearing clothing that appeared to be worth more than half the books owned by the library, reins wrapped awkwardly around his ruined hands. "Well, I guess I'll be seeing you," Leanna said. "Scribe's luck." Baz smiled. "Thanks. I'll be back soon." They stood there just staring at one another. For a moment, Baz thought Leanna meant to hug him, or perhaps expected him to hug her. Odd. But then she turned and walked deeper into the library. Stranger still, Baz felt a bit disappointed she'd left without hugging him, or at least a handshake. "There is truth between the two of you," rumbled Rox. "Shut up, Rox," Baz said before thinking. He cringed, eyes darting to the Harbour and half expecting to find himself without the top of his head by the time his eyes landed on Rox. But Rox was just standing there. The leather mask he wore covered his mouth, of course, but the way his eyes were crinkled at the edges was Rox. Baz threw his hands into the air and turned away from the giant. This was going to be a long trip. All right, welcome back to D.T. Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. Today is February 22nd, 2022, as I record this, which is episode 7 of the podcast. 22222. Lots of twos in today's date here. I guess that's probably not going to happen again for quite some time, so special date today. Right, so a bit shorter of an episode this week. Like I mentioned last week, I have a trip coming up, so I'm recording a couple episodes this week, but still plenty of us to discuss here for Chapter 8, right after we get my personal update over with here. So what do I have going on? I am 120 pages into entering my handwritten edits for Declaimer's Flight. I actually wrote the wrong title here in the my notes here. 120 pages into entering my handwritten edits of Declaimer's Flight in my computer, which is that's spoken book number 3, or part 3, I should say. There's an interesting little aside. I have them divided into parts, not books, because I thought it sounded stupid to say spoken books, book 1, book 2. Too much repetition there. So it's the spoken books uprising, part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. So there you go. So entering my handwritten edits, that's my last step before I send it off to my editor. And then it'll be a few months before I get that back, because she's still working on the second book right now. And speaking of the second book, the cover for that is nearly ready, and I'm planning to reveal that on March 11th. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And if you're not following me on Facebook or Twitter already, and you're interested in seeing that, go check out my profiles there, because I'll be posting it to both of those places, as well as my website. I'm at DT Kane author at both Twitter and Facebook, and then dtkane.com for the website. Right, so that's the writing stuff I've got going on. Like I said, I'm taking a trip to Chicago next week. Got a work conference for a couple days, but then several days of just straight vacation with me and my wife. We have lots of restaurants planned out, and we're going to be spending a couple days up in Andersonville, which is north of the city, a nice little neighborhood up there. There's a great beer bar up there, Belgian beer bar. So we'll be eating lots of mussels and frites and drinking some beer, and we're going to go to the Green Mill Jazz Club one night, and I'm going to go see the Infinite Wrench, which is it's like a improv like play almost. It's pretty cool. They try to put on 30 plays in 60 minutes, and it's all improvised, and it's in a very small theater, and it's a really good show. We've seen it once before, kind of a private small theater company. I'll throw a link in the show notes to that if anyone is interested. The name of the theater company is escaping me, but I'll definitely I'll toss it in the show notes. And if you're ever in Chicago and looking for something maybe a little off the beaten touristy path to do, I would highly recommend it. Other than that, a little bit of an up and down week for me. Got a couple negative reviews on books this week, which were also tempered by I got a nice review of the Acktus Trials on Goodreads, and someone left a nice review of the podcast as well on Apple Podcasts. So thank you for those. Whoever, if you're listening out there, thank you. I appreciate it. The bad reviews, they always get me a little more down than the good ones bring me up, but I'm pretty good at not dwelling on the bad ones too much either. You can't please everyone. There are people out there who don't like Lord of the Rings, right? So if there are people out there who don't like Tolkien, there's certainly going to be people out there who don't like me. So I just gotta keep that in mind. And sometimes, one review says they loved something, and that's why they gave me 5 stars, and another review gives me, 2 stars for the exact same thing that the 5-star review liked. So, you can't please everyone. Though, if you are looking to help me out, the reviews do help. They help with the algorithms. Help if you have more reviews, you're more likely to get bumped up on the search results list on places like Amazon. So if you do have a spare moment and you've read and liked the Acktus Trials, hop on over to wherever you buy your books and think about leaving me a review. It really does help. Or you can also drop a review on Apple Podcasts of this podcast if you're enjoying it, or wherever else you listen to podcasts as well. So I try not to do too much self-promotion on the show here, but if you are enjoying what I'm doing, it does help me out if you leave a review, and it's free, right? So thanks very much for that. Okay, so let's hop into our discussion of Chapter 8. So we start off in Torchsire Library. Couple days have passed, right? It's the morning they're leaving for the trials, and we mentioned, I think back in Chapter 7, that the trials were 2 days away. So a couple days have passed. Baz is just kind of standing off the side, right? Trying to, I don't know. Is he trying to not attract attention because he just doesn't want to get in trouble, or is he trying to avoid having to do any work? Not entirely clear. But for whatever reason, he is standing off to the side. We see Deliritous' father gives him a parting gift, this new cloak, right? But Deliritous clearly likes it. He's he's standing, looking in the mirror, all proud of his new cloak. But Baz surmises that Duke Octavinal probably only gave it to Deliritous so he would look good for the upcoming opening ceremony. So that's kind of a little bit sad, right? Deliritous is over there all happy about Dad's gift, but Dad and him maybe not quite on the same page about that. So maybe another sympathy point there for Deliritous. I know he's got a large deficit to overcome here in the sympathy department, but there you go. Got the dad the dad, the dad who maybe doesn't care for him as much as a dad should. Baz, his typical dour self here, right? He is kind of like ticking off some of the dangers he might face out in the wilds here. He lists worms and sedulous, and also fire breathers, right? And I guess we can guess what a fire breather is, right? That's a dragon. if you weren't guessing there, so maybe we'll see a fire breathing dragon here at some point in the future. And then we know what sedulous are already, though it is interesting to note that they are just kind of wandering out there in the wild. So that's another danger they might be facing. And then worms, maybe a little less clear what exactly a worm is going to be. But if you've read any fantasy before, it's kind of a giant serpent, a dragon that doesn't fly, maybe. So lots of monsters out there that Baz has to has to worry about, right? And that's why the readers generally spend so much time getting ready for the trials, right? This is not a soccer match, right? You could go out there and die. So, right, and Baz, he's always ready with the quips, right? Just reminding us again how unprepared he is. I wouldn't know the difference between a mushroom and poison ivy. He says that to Leanna when she says, "Oh well, you can find food out in the wild, Baz. It's not going to be a big deal." And speaking of Leanna, obviously another interaction between them here. She comes and finds him to bid him farewell. So it seems whatever hard feelings they had for each other when they departed back in Chapter 7 are forgotten here, or at least being swept aside for now for the sake of Baz leaving here. And we really see how comfortable Baz is with her, right? Actually admitting to her that he is nervous. You're flaming right, I'm nervous. he says to her after she kind of catches him rambling on about just random things. And he thinks about denying it, but right. But then he's like, oh well, she'll see right through that. But he doesn't seem to have too much issue saying that to her. And we also see the feeling is kind of reciprocated here. Leanna's actually obviously concerned for Baz. She even asks Rox to look out for him, right? And using some convincing reasoning to do so. Rox, she says, well, you're going to look after both of them, right, Rox? And Rox is like, well, my oath is to Deliritous. But he'll be safer with a speaker available for spells, yes? She actually impresses Rox there. Remember, the Enigmans are the ones who like to twist words around. And Baz is like, oh, you turn words just like an Enigman, which you kind of get the sense is kind of a big compliment from Rox, because he puts a lot of faith into, what words mean, right? The words mean what they mean. We've heard Rox say that catchphrase a few times already. So, interesting here. And, like I said last week, one of the homework assignments was to keep an eye on Rox in this chapter. This is, and we don't even see that much from Rox here, but, this is kind of the most interaction we've had with him so far, and definitely the first time we've seen him without Deliritous also present. The first thing I wanted to bring up with him was actually a point I kind of failed to mention last week, but did you put together that even apparently after having accepted Deliritous' argument back in Chapter 2 that Yeltax was a threat to him, Rox didn't kill Yeltax, obviously, because we saw that he is alive last chapter. And that's despite Deliritous told him to kill Tax, right? But apparently Rox took a middle ground here. He saw that he couldn't just ignore the potential threat that Yeltax posed, but he didn't just go out and kill him either, even though he probably would have been justified in doing so because his master was telling him to. So we've definitely seen that Rox takes his oath to protect Deliritous seriously, but now it seems like he's got some mercy in him too, right? And so maybe not quite the hideous monster we initially thought he was going to be. And certainly we're only seeing Rox through the lens of Baz, right? Baz is our perspective character here, so you have to keep that in mind too. Baz obviously has plenty of reason not to like Rox, even though he gives some more signs here in this chapter 8 that he's not like the worst guy in the world. He offers to go hunting, right? When Baz admits he doesn't know the first thing about finding food in the wild, and then he gives Leanna that compliment we just talked about. He even laughs when he does it, right? He rumbles. That's Rox's dialogue tag a lot. Rox doesn't say things. Rox rumbled, not Rox said. And he also he kind of puts up with Baz, right? Baz makes a few kind of sarcastic remarks to Rox, and it's not like Rox is batting him, punching him over the head or anything. Let's see, your footsteps will scare the deafest animal away, Rox. And then he just tells Rox to shut up at one point too, right? And Rox just brushes Baz's sarcasm off. And then, did you catch this at the end here, what Rox says to Baz? There is truth between the two of you. And he smiles when he says it, right? Now, I don't come right out and say he smiles, right? But Baz sees the eyes crinkle, and then he gets all in a huff about how Rox is acting. So looks like maybe Rox sees a bit of what we've already noticed going on between Baz and Leanna. So Rox is an observant guy here as well. So let's keep an eye on Rox here, as I've been saying. I'm sure you're picking up now. Baz has, Rox has more than one dimension to him, even though Baz just wants to think he is a bloodthirsty monster. We've already seen that's not the case, and we will continue to see it. So look forward to some more of that development of Rox's character. Right. So the gift. Leanna has a gift for Baz here, right? A new cloak, and a nice one, right? Baz says it's made of the same material as the new one Deliritous just got from his father. So Leanna obviously put some thought and probably some money into this if it's the same quality material that a noble is getting. And it's even got a hood, right? And Baz is really excited about that. Remember how he complained back in chapter 3 how speakers aren't permitted to wear hats? What does he say? Oh, he rambles on here, right? It has a hood, he exclaimed. Oh, that's great. My ears are always so flaming freezing, and my scalp. Couldn't they let me have a little hair? And he realizes he's rambling at that point, but clearly he really likes the thing. And, it seems like Leanna knew just what to get him, too. So, again, Leanna knows Baz, and she pays attention, it would seem. Though, interestingly, Leanna also tells Baz to give Deliritous a little break here, right, when Baz criticizes him. Because Leanna notes, he's under a lot of pressure from his father. And I think she sees that Deliritous is a bit of a blind spot for Baz, and she's sensitive. I think she knows what happens. She knows what happened to Baz's brother, just like everyone else. But she is trying to, she's trying to warn him a little. You can't just write Deliritous off entirely. What is Baz? And again, we just see how little regard Baz has for Deliritous when pardon me, how little regard Baz has for Deliritous. What does he say here? Come on, Leanna, Baz said. You're talking like Deliritous is actually a person with feelings. We all know that's not the case. Baz doesn't even want to think about Deliritous as being a real human being here. And, I think that's, this is definitely a theme throughout the story here. Trust. Trust is a big theme here, particularly learning to trust someone who, broke your trust previously. And Baz is going to have varying levels of success dealing with that throughout the book. But, he is trying to paint this, he has plenty of reason to not like Deliritous, but he is painting as bad a picture as he can in his head to justify those feelings, right? And that's just another thing to keep an eye on here. Is Baz, as the story progresses, is he going to be able to keep believing this internal monologue he has going on about Deliritous? We'll have to see. And then, of course, a little sappy here at the end. Leanna and Baz part, kind of both awkwardly, not exactly sure how to say goodbye to one another. And then Baz is surprised to find he's a little upset she didn't give him a hug when she walked away. So, Baz is going to have someone to be thinking about while he's out in the wilds here, it would seem. And we got this cloak as a reminder of Leanna waiting for him back in Erstwhile. And that's it for Chapter 8. So definitely going a little shorter here than usual. But, a little bit of a breath, a little bit of a breather after several very long episodes here. So your homework assignment for next week, we'll be reading Chapter 9, which is definitely longer than Chapter 8. So we'll be back probably into like the hour longish range episode next week here. And we're going to see the opening ceremony for the trials. We'll get some more details on the other competitors in the trials, Marla and Hellar, and we'll see each of their harbors and speakers as well that they're bringing with them. And then we'll get a bit of a history lesson about oration. And we'll see some connections, some of the connections here that we've been making with the prologue and kind of little clues that we've been seeing throughout the chapters that we've been talking about. Some of those are going to come into greater focus here when we hear about the history of oration during the opening ceremony. See if you can pick up on some of those connections. Like I said, we're constantly going back to that prologue and seeing the foundation it was laying. And we'll also, not much homework here, I think, but we'll also hear kind of what the official rules of the trials are. So that'll be interesting as well. So that's what you have to look forward to next week. Do your homework if you can. But if you can't, don't worry, because as always, I will be doing all of your reading for you and answering all those questions and many more on the next episode. All right, listener question this week. Got one here from Linda in New York. Thanks for another question, Linda. And she asks, DT, how much time per week do you spend working on your writing? Well, thanks for the question, Linda. And I do like these questions, probably just because I don't really have much opportunity in the day-to-day to talk about my actual writing process to anyone at all. So let's see. I think we've talked a little bit about my daily schedule in the past, but just to go over it again, usually I wake up, I'd like to say I wake up at 6, but usually I don't manage to peel myself out of bed till about 6:30. Go eat breakfast and walk the dog, and then I usually try to get about an hour of work in the morning. Either that'll be editing time, or usually if I'm drafting something, I don't do a lot of creative stuff first thing in the morning, so I might be outlining a chapter I plan to be writing later on that day. So I'll do that until, about 9. Like I said, try to get at least an hour in, maybe a little more. But around 9, that's when I start my my day job, which I'm blessed to be able to do that mostly from home. So I do work in my home office. And sometimes during the day I have a little time, like at the lunch hour, to do a little work on writing, but usually the day job really takes up most of my time between 9 and 5, and then I go make dinner around 6 and hang out with my wife for a little bit, and then it's usually back up to the office around 7, and then 7 to 10, call it 2 hours, 7:30 to 9:30 or 8 to 10, but call it 2 hours. So what's that? 3 hours, 3 hours, 5 days a week. So that's 15 hours, maybe a little less than that. Fridays I usually try to take the evening off. So, maybe call it 14 hours, let's say, during the week, and try to get at least 3 hours in each weekend day, sometimes a little more. So I guess let's call it between 20 and 25 hours each week. So, it's not quite a full-time job yet, but it's getting there. And, on top of my already full-time job, I've got the plate's pretty full, but like I've said before, you are what you do every day. So I do really try to just live by that mantra. I'm not going to get the stories out there unless I just keep plugging away on them. So, but yeah, 20 to 25 hours. I'd love to get to the point where I can maybe flip it and I'm just working a day job for 20 hours and I'm getting a solid 40 plus hours a week in on the writing and the podcasting and all that good stuff. But I'm in a pretty good spot right now. So I just got to keep plugging away, and I just got to keep reminding myself of that too. The positive self-talk is it's important for everyone, but I think it's especially important for writers. And really, I'm giving myself a pep talk here more than anything at this point. But writing, very solitary thing, right? I'm just sitting up here with my keyboard and my screen most days. I don't have anyone telling me if I'm doing anything right or wrong or anything in between. So takes a lot of faith and confidence in yourself to keep plugging away. So I have days where I feel down and think everything I'm writing is total crap. But usually I can pull myself out of those attitudes pretty quickly. So another reason, keep sending me some nice comments. Those definitely help build me up. It's nice to hear when someone's actually enjoying the stories I am telling. So maybe a little bit more than you were looking for there, Linda, but I appreciate the question, and keep the questions coming, all of you listeners out there. I love talking about my writing process with you, or where I got certain ideas for things in the story, or within reason, anything else that you can think of. I would be happy to answer on the show here in a future episode. So shoot me an email, dtkane@dtkane.com, or you could just leave it in the Facebook group as well at dtkaneauthor. Or I guess you could tweet me as well at dtkaneauthor. Right, so this week's quest, just a simple one here. I couldn't think of a real good one coming out of the actual reading here. So who is your favorite fantasy author? I'm interested to hear, who my audience's favorites are. And don't say D.T. Kane. I know you'll be lying. So your favorite fantasy author other than D.T. Kane. No. Favorite fantasy author, period. I'm certainly not putting myself anywhere close to some of the titans who are, I'm sure, your favorite authors out there. But I am interested to see if there's any common threads amongst the listeners, or how diverse we are in our listening and reading preferences. Okay, so there's the quest. That'll just be one experience point. That's an easy one. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not an easy one because you can't pick who your favorite author is. But regardless, it'll be one experience. Okay, and then just final reminder, if you have any other quest answers you want to get in from the first 6 episodes, get those in soon here, because I'll be going over all of the answers in the first episode of March. So get those quest answers in. Okay, so we'll close with our quote, like we always do. This one comes from Neil Gaiman, who I suspect may be one of the answers to this week's quest. So many good books out there by Mr. Gaiman. American Gods is one of my favorites in particular. Though that's not where this quote comes from. This one comes from the Graveyard book, which probably geared a little more towards a younger audience, but I think it's a great book too, about a orphaned boy who grows up in a graveyard and is raised by ghosts. Talk about a concept there. Just think of all the stories that come out of that. So that's a book I would certainly recommend if you're looking for a nice, an easy read, but definitely a worthwhile read, and some deeper themes in it too. So definitely worth your time. But Mr. Gaiman in the Graveyard book said, "Wherever you go, you take yourself with you." Wow, there's too much for me to unpack in there, and the 30 seconds we have to go over the quote. But geez, I think I was looking for quotes about traveling because Baz is about to go on a trip here, right? And Baz is taking all of his baggage with him, right? As do we all wherever we go. Is Baz, like I said, is Baz going to be able to overcome his blind spot to work with Deliritous, or is he going to potentially self-sabotage or become a self-fulfilling prophecy here and ruin their chances of succeeding on this quest they're on because he can't work with Deliritous? We'll have to see, but we certainly know that Baz is taking himself with himself as he travels, and and I think there's something about here. There's something about self-acceptance in this quote too, right? You can't run away from yourself. You're always with you. So you should, just learn to love yourself and accept yourself for who you are. I wasn't planning to go there with this quote, but I think that's a nice take on it. So we'll leave with that. You are certainly enough. Everyone out there. So smile and know, wherever you go, you've got you, and that's enough. So that's how we'll close the podcast today. So as always, thank you for listening, and until next time, this has been D.T. Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. Thanks for listening to D.T. Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. If you liked today's episode, please consider rating and reviewing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified whenever new episodes become available. If you'd like to listen to back episodes or review the show notes, visit dtkane.com/podcast. D.T. Kane's novels are available for purchase at most major online retailers, or you can purchase directly from his website at www.dtkane.com/books. You can receive a free short story and sign up for D.T. Kane's mailing list at dtkane.com/email-signup. If you'd like to connect, you can find D.T. Kane on Facebook at D.T. Kane Author or Twitter at D.T. Kane Author, or send D.T. Kane an email at dtkane@dtkane.com. See you next week.